This is a story of a woman who found a wet towel in her bedroom after landing early from her business trip. Welcome to Mr. Douglas Tales. May clarity guide your path, and may truth always find you first. Please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments after the story. Now, let me tell you about a woman who came home one day early and discovered her entire marriage was a lie. The spare towel hung over the chair, white against teak, still folded the way housekeeping left it. Vivian's fingers closed around the terry cloth before she understood why she was reaching for it. The steam from the bathroom had already cleared. The shower had stopped 20 minutes ago, but she hadn't taken a shower. Neither had her husband. She pulled the towel off the chair in one motion, turned, and walked out of the master suite without looking at the bed. The sheets were tangled at the foot. The duvet had slid halfway to the floor. A water glass sat on the nightstand, the wrong side. Graham slept on the left. He kept his water on the left. This glass was on the right, where she slept, except she hadn't slept here last night. She had been in Singapore, a red-eye, an acquisition that needed her signature before the market opened in Hong Kong. Vivian descended the curved staircase, the towel still clutched in her hand like evidence she hadn't yet catalogued. The house was quiet. Too quiet for 9 in the morning on a Saturday. The staff should have been visible, should have been audible. The clatter of dishes being loaded. The hum of the vacuum in the east wing. The murmur of the gardening crew arguing in Spanish about the roses. Nothing. She stopped on the landing. Listened. A door closed somewhere at the ground floor. Not slammed. Eased. The kind of close that meant someone was trying not to be heard. Her feet carried her forward before her mind caught up. Through the gallery with its Rothko that Graham had bought to impress clients he'd stopped seeing years ago. Past the library where first editions gathered dust in climate-controlled cases. Down the short hall to the service entrance where deliveries came and where, 12 years into this marriage, Vivian had learned not to appear unannounced. The door to the mudroom stood slightly ajar. She pushed it open. Graham stood with his back to her, his phone pressed to his ear. His voice dropped to that register she recognized from negotiations, the one that meant he was either closing a deal or concealing a liability. His hair was still damp. His shirt was buttoned wrong. The second button skipped entirely, leaving a gap at his collar. Can't come back yet. Not until she's gone to the office. I'll call you when... He stopped, his shoulders locked. He didn't turn around. She's not going to the office, Vivian said. Her voice came out flat, stripped of the emotion that should have accompanied the words. Her flight landed early. Graham lowered the phone. His thumb moved across the screen. Ending the call or muting it, she couldn't tell. When he finally turned, his expression had already arranged itself into something resembling confusion. As if he couldn't quite parse why she was standing in the mudroom with a wet towel in her hand. Viv, I thought you weren't back until tomorrow. I can see that. She watched his eyes flick to the towel, watched something pass through his face. Calculation, assessment, the rapid sorting of possible explanations and their relative plausibility. Graham had built a hedge fund on the ability to evaluate risk in fractions of a second. She had watched him do it 1,000 times across conference tables and trading floors. She had never expected to see him do it to her. I had a meeting, he said, early, a potential investor. She came by to discuss. She. The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Graham's jaw tightened. It's not what you think. I don't know what I think yet. Vivian held up the towel. But I know this was on the chair in our bedroom, and I know the sheets are on the floor, and I know you skipped a button getting dressed. So whatever I'm supposed to think, I imagine you can explain it. Or you can stop explaining, but you can't do both. He took a step toward her. She didn't step back, but her hand found the doorframe, steadied herself against it. Vivian, sweetheart, don't. Can we at least go inside? Sit down? Talk about this like what? She cut him off. Like adults? Like partners? The laugh that escaped her was short and humorless. There's a water glass on my nightstand, Graham. The wrong nightstand. So unless you've suddenly developed a preference for sleeping on the right side of the bed, I don't think we have a lot to talk about. His phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced at the screen reflexively, then shoved it in his pocket, but not before Vivian caught the flash of a name. Just initials. NB. Who's NB? No one. You were just on the phone with no one? It's a work contact. A work contact who comes to our house at 8 a.m. to use our shower? Graham's hand came up, rubbing the back of his neck. A tell she'd noticed years ago, back when they were dating, back when she found his nervous habits endearing instead of incriminating. You're upset, I understand, but this isn't... What apartment? The question stopped him. His hand froze against his neck. What? The apartment. Where is it? Vivian's voice had gone cold, clinical, the voice she used in depositions, in negotiations, in the moments when emotion became liability. You wouldn't bring her here unless you didn't have another option. So wherever you usually take her, you couldn't go there this time, which means either she has a husband too, or the apartment is being watched, or there's some other reason you had to use our house like a hotel. So tell me. Where is the apartment? Graham stared at her. The mask of confusion had slipped. What remained underneath was something harder, something she recognized from their worst arguments, the ones they'd had early on before they learned to conduct their marriage like a merger with careful negotiations and strategic silences. There isn't an apartment. Graham. There was. But I ended the lease. 6 months ago, I was trying to... He stopped, started again. I was trying to stop. Vivian processed this. The admission landed somewhere outside of her, muffled by a buffer she hadn't known she'd built. She found herself cataloging the information the way she would catalog a problem at the firm, dispassionately, analytically, as if the subject under examination were someone else's marriage instead of her own. 6 months, she repeated. So this has been going on for 14 months. The number hung in the air. 14 months. 14 months of business trips she hadn't questioned. Late nights at the office she'd accepted without suspicion. Weekends when he'd gone to the gym and come back smelling like unfamiliar soap. 14 months of her life running parallel to a truth she hadn't seen, hadn't wanted to see, hadn't allowed herself to consider even when the evidence was there, waiting to be noticed. Who is she? Graham shook his head. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Knowing won't help. It'll just make this worse. Worse for who? He didn't answer. Vivian looked at the towel in her hand. White, expensive. Part of the set she'd ordered from a boutique hotel supplier in Portugal after they'd stayed at that resort in the Algarve 3 summers ago. She had wanted their home to feel like that trip. Luxurious, curated, a space designed for comfort. She had spent months selecting the linens, the towels, the robes that hung in the closet of a bedroom that now felt like a crime scene. She dropped the towel on the floor. "I'm going to the study," she said. "You're not going to follow me. You're not going to call anyone. You're not going to leave the house. When I'm ready to talk, I'll find you." "Viv, if you're not here when I come looking, I'll assume you've made your choice." She turned and walked away. Her heels clicked against the hardwood, steady, unhurried. Behind her, Graham said nothing, made no move to follow. She counted his silence as confirmation of something she hadn't wanted to confirm. The study was at the end of the east wing, past the guest bedrooms and the upstairs sitting room that no one ever sat in. Vivian locked the door behind her and stood with her back against it, breathing. The room smelled like leather and old paper, like the books Graham had inherited from his father and never read. She had always liked this room. It felt like the one space in the house that belonged to her, despite the Hartwell family portraits on the walls. Despite the antique desk that had belonged to 3 generations of Hartwell men before it became a surface for her laptop and her files and the coffee cups she forgot to return to the kitchen. She crossed to the desk, sat in the chair, opened her laptop. For a long moment she stared at the screen without seeing it. Then she typed. The family attorney's email appeared in the search results, his cell phone listed in her contacts, but she didn't reach for her phone. Not yet. Instead, she opened the folder she had created 6 months ago, the one she had labeled Tax Documents 2019 because she knew Graham would never look at anything that boring. The one that contained, among other things, a draft divorce petition she had asked a colleague to prepare without ever intending to use it. She had told herself it was insurance, a precaution. The kind of exit strategy that any prudent person would have, even if they never expected to need it. The file opened on her screen. She began to read. 2 hours later, Vivian stood at the window of the study, watching the grounds staff she hadn't heard earlier emerge from wherever they'd been hiding. They moved across the lawn with their usual efficiency, trimming hedges, adjusting the sprinkler heads, pretending nothing unusual had happened in the main house. She wondered what they knew, what they'd seen. How long the household had been keeping secrets from her that they told each other in Spanish, assuming she couldn't understand. Her Spanish was better than Graham knew. A knock on the study door made her turn. "Mrs. Hartwell?" The voice belonged to Patricia, the house manager. 63 years old, steel gray hair, a posture that suggested she had once been a dancer and now applied the same rigid discipline to managing an estate of 27 rooms and a rotating staff of 11. "What is it, Patricia?" "Mr. Hartwell asked me to inform you that he's waiting in the library. He says he's prepared to answer any questions you have." Vivian almost laughed. Prepared? As if this were a deposition. As if 14 months of lies could be unpacked in a Q&A session, cataloged and dismissed. "Tell him I'll be there when I'm ready." A pause. "He also asked me to mention that Mrs. Blackwell has left the property." The name landed like a slap. Blackwell. Vivian turned slowly. "Mrs. Blackwell?" Patricia's face remained carefully neutral, but something shifted behind her eyes. Discomfort. Or perhaps the recognition that she had just delivered information she shouldn't have. "The woman who was here this morning. I was instructed not to." "Nina Blackwell?" The name came out before Vivian could stop it. She watched Patricia's expression confirm everything. Nina Blackwell, Graham's college girlfriend, the woman who had shown up at their wedding with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and a gift that Vivian had never opened. The woman who had appeared at industry functions over the years, always with a different husband, always positioned just close enough to Graham to make Vivian's skin prickle with something she'd told herself was irrational jealousy. 14 months. Nina Blackwell had been in her house, in her bedroom, in her shower, using her towels, drinking water from a glass on her nightstand. That will be all? Patricia. Yes, ma'am. The house manager retreated. The door closed. Vivian returned to her laptop. The divorce petition was still open on the screen, but she minimized it. Opened a new browser window. Typed Nina Blackwell's name into the search bar. The results loaded. Nina Blackwell, née Thorne. Twice divorced. Currently single according to a society page from 4 months ago. Philanthropist. Board member of 3 nonprofits, including one that Vivian recognized. A children's education fund that Graham had been donating to for years. She had signed the checks herself. Had never questioned why the amounts had increased. Had never thought to look at who else sat on the board. She scrolled. A photo from a gala last September. Nina in emerald silk, her hand on Graham's arm. They were part of a group. 6 or 7 people clustered near a bar, but Vivian could see the way Nina's body angled toward him. The way his smile looked different than the one he wore for cameras. She had seen that photo when it was published, had told herself it meant nothing. She scrolled further. A real estate listing from 18 months ago. A penthouse apartment in the financial district, purchased under an LLC. The name of the LLC was meaningless, a string of letters that could have belonged to anyone. But the address matched a building where Graham's fund had office space. She had never visited that office, had never been invited. The apartment, the one he said he'd ended the lease on 6 months ago. But this wasn't a lease. This was a purchase. And when she cross-referenced the closing date with the timeline Graham had given her, the math didn't add up. He hadn't ended the lease. He'd bought the apartment. For her. The library smelled like Graham's cologne, sandalwood and something sharper, citrus or bergamot, mixed with the leather of the armchairs and the dust that collected on the books no one touched. Vivian stood in the doorway without entering, taking stock of the scene before she committed to being part of it. Graham sat in the chair nearest the fireplace, which wasn't lit despite the chill. His elbows rested on his knees, his hands were clasped, his posture suggested contrition, but Vivian had watched him close enough deals to know how easily he manufactured emotion. "Close the door," he said. "I'll leave it open." He looked up. Something passed through his expression. Annoyance, maybe. Or recognition that she wasn't going to play her part in whatever script he'd written in his head. "Vivian, please, this is a private conversation." "There's no such thing as private in this house." She stepped into the room but stayed near the door. "Not anymore. Not after this morning." "I'm trying to explain, you bought her an apartment." The word stopped him cold. "I don't know what you think you found, but the LLC, I traced it. Took me 20 minutes. Vivian watched his face for the tell she knew would come. There it was. The slight tightening around his eyes. The involuntary swallow. "You bought her a $2 million apartment in the Greystone building 18 months ago, 6 months before you told me you ended the lease. You didn't end anything, Graham. You upgraded." He stood, crossed toward her with his hands raised. palms out, the gesture of a man approaching a wild animal. Let me explain. I'm listening. The apartment wasn't for her, it was— He stopped, recalibrated. It was meant to be for us. A city place. Somewhere we could stay when we had early meetings, late dinners. I was going to surprise you. With an apartment you never told me about? The timing was never right. 14 months, Graham. The timing was never right in 14 months? His hands dropped. The contrition slid off his face like water off glass, replaced by something harder, something that looked almost like relief. Fine, he said. You want the truth? Here's the truth. The apartment was for us. Then it was for her. Then it was supposed to be for us again. I was going to end things. I was trying to— You keep saying that. Trying to. As if ending an affair is some Herculean task that's been beyond your capabilities for over a year. It's complicated. It's not. Vivian's voice was flat, controlled. It's the simplest thing in the world. You either stop or you don't. You chose not to. 14 months of choosing not to. So don't stand there and tell me you were trying. Graham's jaw worked. She watched him cycle through responses, discarding each one before it reached his lips. In 12 years of marriage, she had learned to read his silences almost as well as his words. This one said he had run out of lies. What do you want me to say? He asked finally. I don't want you to say anything. I want you to sign. She reached into the pocket of her blazer and produced a folded document. The petition she had been drafting for 6 months, finally printed. Finally ready. She held it out to him. Graham didn't take it, didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the paper as if it might combust if he stared at it long enough. You had this prepared. 6 months ago. Before— He stopped. His face shifted, rearranging itself around a new understanding. You knew. I suspected. You suspected. And you had divorce papers drawn up? And you never said anything? I was waiting. For what? Vivian considered the question. She had asked herself the same thing in the quiet hours when Graham was away and she sat alone in this house that had never felt like home. What had she been waiting for? Proof? She'd had suspicions strong enough to prepare for the end of her marriage. Confirmation? She hadn't wanted it, hadn't gone looking, had carefully arranged her life to avoid encountering it. For you to stop, she said finally. On your own. Without me having to be the one to catch you. That's— Graham shook his head. That's insane. You knew and you just waited? For 14 months. I didn't know how long it had been going on. I didn't want to know. Vivian's hand was steady, still holding out the papers. But now I do. And now there's nothing to wait for. Graham stared at the document. His expression had shifted again. No longer defensive, no longer calculating, but something closer to bewildered, as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet and he hadn't yet found his balance. I'm not signing anything right now. Then I'll file without your signature. You can't just— I can. I've already spoken to counsel. The papers are drafted, the timeline is clear, and given what happened this morning, I don't think any court is going to find my position unreasonable. What about the fund? The assets? We have entanglements, Vivian. It's not as simple as— I know exactly how entangled we are. She stepped closer. Her voice dropped, intimate despite the distance between them. I've spent the last 6 months reviewing every account, every holding, every subsidiary with my name on it. I know what I'm entitled to. I know what you've hidden, And I know that if this goes to litigation, you'll spend more on lawyers trying to keep me from finding the rest than you would if you just signed now and let me walk away with what's fair." Graham's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, the rest?" "Ask your accountant, the one who's been moving money into offshore accounts since before we were married. The one who thinks I don't read the statements because I never ask questions." Vivian smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. "I read the statements, Graham. I've always read the statements." The color drained from his face. "Those accounts are marital property. Yes, I know." She pressed the papers into his hand. "Sign now, and we can keep this quiet. Refuse, and I file Monday morning. Your choice." His fingers closed around the document reflexively. He looked at it, then at her, then at the door she'd left open behind her. "I need time." "You've had 14 months. I need to talk to my lawyer." "Talk to whoever you want. My offer expires at midnight." Vivian turned toward the door. "I'll be in the study." "Vivian." She stopped. Didn't turn around. "I never meant for any of this to happen." The words hung in the air. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, or what he wanted her to believe was sincerity. After 12 years, she couldn't always tell the difference. "Neither did I," she said, and then she was gone. The afternoon bled into evening. Vivian stayed in the study, her laptop open, her files spread across the desk in organized piles that she reorganized whenever the silence became too heavy. The house had gone quiet in that particular way it did when the staff knew something was wrong and were making themselves scarce. At 7, Patricia brought her a tray, a sandwich, a pot of tea, a slice of lemon cake that Vivian hadn't asked for but recognized as the house manager's version of comfort. "Has Mr. Hartwell had any visitors?" Vivian asked. "His lawyer arrived at 4. They've been in the library since then." "Anyone else?" Patricia hesitated. "A delivery. From the Blackwell residence." Vivian set down her cup. "What kind of delivery?" "A package. I placed it in the front hall as instructed." "Instructed by whom?" "Mr. Hartwell." The answer was expected, but it still landed with the weight of confirmation. Graham was still communicating with Nina, still receiving things from her, as if this morning hadn't happened, as if Vivian's ultimatum were a speed bump rather than a cliff. "Bring me the package," Patricia's expression flickered. "Ma'am, Mr. Hartwell specifically asked—" "Patricia," Vivian's voice went cold. "Who signs your paychecks?" The question hung between them. It wasn't a threat, not quite, but it didn't need to be. After 6 years of managing this household, Patricia knew where the power resided. It had always resided with Vivian. Graham might make the money, but Vivian controlled the infrastructure, the accounts, the schedules, the logistics that kept this house running. She had designed it that way deliberately, and now she was calling in the debt. "I'll bring it right away," Patricia said. The package arrived 5 minutes later, a manila envelope, thick with contents, sealed with clear tape that had been applied hastily, as if someone had packed it in a hurry. There was no return address, no markings of any kind except Vivian's name, written in a handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it. Inside, a stack of photographs. A ledger, handwritten, with dates and figures and notations in a shorthand she couldn't decipher, a USB drive, unlabeled, and a letter, typed on plain white paper with no signature. She read the letter first. "I know this will seem like cruelty. It isn't meant to be. What I'm giving you is leverage. He won't sign unless he believes he has more to lose by fighting than by letting go. These are your weapons. Use them." Vivian turned to the photographs. The first was Graham and Nina at a restaurant she didn't recognize. Intimate lighting, a corner table, his hand over hers. The second was Graham entering a building that she now knew was the Greystone, a woman just visible behind him through the glass doors. The third was a bank statement, photographed rather than printed, showing a wire transfer for $500,000 to an account in the Caymans. She flipped through the rest. Each image was dated, stamped with metadata that she didn't need a forensic expert to understand. Someone had been documenting Graham's affair for months. Someone who wasn't her. She reached the last photograph and stopped. It wasn't Graham. It was her, Vivian, walking into the office of her own attorney. Vivian carrying a folder that she recognized, the draft petition. Vivian, photographed 3 months ago when she had made her first appointment to discuss her options. Someone had been watching her too. She set the photographs down, picked up the letter again, read the last line which she had missed the first time. "You and I have the same enemy. That makes us allies, whether you want to be or not." The library door was open when Vivian arrived. Graham and his lawyer, a gray-haired man she recognized from industry events, Victor something, one of the city's leading divorce attorneys, were seated at the table, documents spread between them in careful stacks. Graham looked up when she entered. His expression was guarded, controlled, the face he wore for negotiations. "Vivian. Victor and I were just going over the terms you proposed." "I'm not here to negotiate terms." She held up the envelope. "I'm here to show you these." Victor rose. "Mrs. Hartwell, I should advise you that any discussion of financial matters should be conducted through proper channels." "Sit down, Victor." The lawyer blinked, looked at Graham, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. He sat. Vivian crossed to the table, spread the photographs across its surface like playing cards, watched Graham's face as he recognized each one, watched the color drain from his skin, then flood back, red and mottled with something that might have been rage or fear. "Where did you get these?" "Someone delivered them. This evening." She pointed to the bank statement. "The Caymans account. That's the one I couldn't find when I was going through the records." "The one you thought was hidden." Graham's jaw tightened. "That account is marital property?" Vivian finished. "Yes, I thought so. But I couldn't prove it. Now I can." Victor leaned forward, examining the documents with practiced detachment. "These appear to be surveillance photographs. The provenance is questionable. Any competent judge would wonder why Graham felt the need to hide $500,000 in an offshore account without his wife's knowledge." Vivian tapped the bank statement. "The photographs are circumstantial. This isn't." Graham stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood. "Who sent these? Was it Nina?" The letter wasn't signed. It had to be her. She's the only one who... He stopped. His hands were shaking, Vivian noticed, actually shaking. "She's been threatening me. Saying she'd go public if I didn't leave you. I thought she was bluffing." Victor held up a hand. "Graham, I need to speak with you privately." "Not yet." Graham's eyes were fixed on Vivian. "You have to understand. This isn't... I didn't plan any of this. She targeted me. She's been manipulating this entire situation from the beginning. She didn't force you to sleep with her for 14 months. No, but she... He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture wild, uncontrolled. She told me she was pregnant 3 months ago. Said if I didn't leave you, she'd tell the press. She'd ruin everything we've built. The words landed in the silence of the room. Vivian felt them settle somewhere beneath her ribs, in the place where shock lived before it transformed into something harder. She had been prepared for many things. An affair. A mistress. The slow unraveling of a marriage she had suspected was failing for years. She had not been prepared for this. Is she? The question came out steady, but only because Vivian had spent 20 years learning to control her voice. Pregnant? I don't know. She says she lost it a few weeks ago, but she won't let me confirm. Graham's voice cracked. She won't let me confirm anything. She just keeps changing the story. One day she's devastated, the next she's threatening to go to the tabloids. I don't know what's real anymore. Victor stood. This is exactly why we need to speak privately. Graham, these are serious allegations. If this woman has been engaging in a pattern of manipulation and extortion, she's not extorting him. Vivian's voice cut through the lawyer's hedging. She's exposing him. There's a difference. Graham stared at her. You're defending her? I'm stating facts. She gave me evidence of financial fraud you've been committing for years. Evidence I couldn't find on my own. Whatever her motives are, the result is the same. Vivian gathered the photographs. You've been hiding assets. You've been lying about the affair. And now there's a pregnancy, real or fabricated, that you've also failed to mention until this moment. So tell me, Graham, what else haven't you told me? The question hung in the air. Graham's mouth opened, closed. His eyes went to Victor, who was already shaking his head, already signaling silence, already preparing to do the work of lawyers everywhere, minimizing damage, controlling narrative, building walls around truth. But Vivian didn't need his answer. She had learned what she came to learn. She turned and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Graham's voice followed her. To make a phone call. To whom? She stopped at the threshold, looked back at him, at the man she had married, the man she had trusted, the man who had spent 12 years constructing a life beside her while building another life in shadow. To the one person who apparently knows more about my husband than I do. The number was on the back of the letter, handwritten in the same unfamiliar script that had spelled out Vivian's name on the envelope. 10 digits. No area code, no explanation, no indication of who would answer when she called. Vivian sat in the study with the door locked, the phone in her hand, the number glowing on the screen. It was after 10. The house had gone silent. Graham was still in the library with Victor or in his office, or somewhere else she didn't care to track. Patricia had come to ask if she needed anything and had been dismissed with a shake of the head. The staff had retreated to their quarters and Vivian was alone with a decision she hadn't expected to face. She pressed the call button. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, I wondered how long it would take you. The voice was female, warm, with an edge of something that might have been amusement. Vivian didn't recognize it, but she hadn't expected to. You sent me the photographs. I did. Why? A pause, the sound of something shifting. A chair, perhaps, or a body settling into a new position. Because you needed them, and because I knew you'd know what to do with them. You don't know me. I know you better than you think. The woman's voice softened. We have something in common, Mrs. Hartwell. We've both been lied to by the same man. The difference is you're still in a position to do something about it. Vivian turned this over in her mind. The voice wasn't Nina's. She was certain of that. Nina had a particular cadence, a way of speaking that Vivian would have recognized even after years apart. This woman was different. Older, perhaps. More measured. Who are you? Someone who made the mistake of trusting Graham Hartwell a long time ago. Someone who's been watching him ever since, waiting for the right moment to balance the scales. That's not an answer. No, it's not. The woman paused again. But you don't need to know who I am to use what I've given you. The photographs are real. The bank statements are authentic. The ledger documents every deposit he's made into that Cayman's account over the past 8 years. If you want to take him apart in court, you have everything you need. Vivian looked at the ledger, still open on the desk. 8 years. The account predated their marriage by 3 years. Graham had been building his escape hatch before he'd even walked down the aisle. What do you want in return? Nothing. I don't believe that. I know you don't, but it's true. The woman's voice was calm, utterly without guile. I don't need his money. I don't want his attention. I just want him to face what he's done. All of it. Every woman, every lie, every dollar he's hidden away while pretending to be an honest man. I want the world to see who he really is. So you're using me. I'm giving you a choice. That's different. Vivian considered this. The logic was clean, if cold. She had been given tools. What she did with them was up to her. The woman on the phone wasn't forcing her hand. She was simply laying cards on the table and stepping back. What if I don't use them? Then you don't. And Graham goes on being Graham. And Nina goes on being whatever she is to him. And you go back to a marriage that you already know is over. The woman's voice hardened slightly. But I don't think you'll do that. I've been watching you, Mrs. Hartwell, for months. I know how you operate. You're not the kind of woman who walks away from leverage. The words landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Vivian found herself remembering the draft petition prepared 6 months ago and held in reserve. The statements she'd been reading without Graham's knowledge. The careful documentation of every anomaly, every unexplained expense, every question she'd chosen not to ask out loud. She had been preparing for this moment longer than she wanted to admit. The photographs of me, she said, the ones showing me going to my attorney. Were those a threat? A demonstration? The woman's voice softened again. I've been watching both of you. I know you've been preparing. I wanted you to know that you weren't alone in seeing what he is, that someone else had been paying attention. That sounds like a threat. It was an invitation. A breath, audible through the phone. You and I are on the same side, Mrs. Hartwell. Whether you believe that or not, I'm not your enemy. Then who is my enemy? You know the answer to that. The line went dead. Vivian stared at the phone for a long moment. Then she set it down, picked up the ledger, began to read. Morning came gray and cold, the first hint of autumn settling over the estate like a held breath. Vivian had not slept. Her eyes burned, her back ached from hours hunched over documents, but her mind was clear, clearer than it had been in months. She showered in the guest bathroom, avoiding the master suite entirely. Dressed in the clothes she kept in the study closet for emergencies, a charcoal suit, a white blouse, shoes that clicked authority against hardwood floors, applied makeup with a steady hand. By the time she descended the stairs, the sun was up, and Patricia was waiting at the bottom with a cup of coffee and an expression that suggested the household had already been briefed on the night's developments. Mr. Hartwell left at 6, the house manager said. He took a bag. Vivian accepted the coffee without surprise. Where did he go? He didn't say. His driver took him to the airport. Which airport? Teterboro. Private flights, of course. Graham had always preferred to control his exits. Did he leave anything behind? A message? Patricia hesitated. He left his wedding ring on the nightstand, in the master bedroom. The information landed differently than Vivian expected. She had anticipated fight, negotiation, a protracted legal battle waged through intermediaries. She had not anticipated capitulation, unless it wasn't capitulation. Get me his itinerary, she said. Contact his assistant. I want to know where that plane is going and who he's meeting when he lands. Yes, ma'am. Patricia retreated. Vivian drank her coffee and considered the possibilities. Graham running was not the same as Graham surrendering. If he had taken a bag, if he had flown private, if he had removed his wedding ring but failed to sign the papers, then he was regrouping, not retreating. Consulting with lawyers in jurisdictions she couldn't reach, moving money she hadn't yet traced, preparing a counterattack. She needed to move faster. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. He's going to Geneva. The account there is in both your names, but he has sole signatory authority. Move now or lose it. Vivian stared at the message. The same unknown informant, the same precise intelligence. She pulled up her contacts, found the name of the attorney she had retained in Zurich 3 months ago, when she had first begun to suspect that Graham's financial footprint extended beyond U.S. jurisdiction. She hadn't told the attorney why she was interested in Swiss banking law. She hadn't told anyone, but somehow the woman on the phone had known. The Zurich office of Brenner and Associates occupied the top floor of a building that overlooked the Limit River. Vivian had flown overnight, her only luggage a briefcase containing the documents from the envelope and a change of clothes purchased at a boutique near the airport. Matthias Brenner was waiting when she arrived. A tall man with silver hair and the watchful eyes of someone who had spent 30 years handling money that didn't want to be found. Mrs. Hartwell, I received your message. His English was precise, accented but fluent. I must tell you, the request you've made is unusual. I understand. You are asking me to freeze an account that bears your husband's name. An account in which you are listed as co-signatory. I'm aware of what I'm asking. Brenner studied her. His expression gave nothing away, but Vivian could sense the calculation happening behind his eyes. Divorce proceedings were common enough in his practice. Women arriving with bruises and bank statements, men arriving with briefcases and threats. But this, a wife appearing before her husband, demanding preemptive action on an account she shouldn't have known existed, was something else. If I may ask, Brenner said carefully, how did you become aware of this account? Vivian placed the ledger on his desk. Someone gave me this. He opened it, flipped through the pages. His expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, but something adjacent to it. Recognition. This is comprehensive. It's 8 years of transactions. Deposits. Withdrawals, transfers. All of it documented in what appears to be my husband's handwriting. And you received this how? Anonymously. Brenner closed the ledger, leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Hartwell, in my experience, anonymous gifts of this nature do not come without cost. Someone went to considerable trouble to assemble this information. Someone with access to your husband's private affairs. Have you considered why they might want you to have it? I've considered it, and it doesn't change what the documents show. Vivian met his gaze without flinching. My husband has been hiding assets from our marriage for nearly a decade. He is currently in transit to this city, presumably to move those assets beyond my reach. I am asking you to prevent that from happening. Brenner was silent for a long moment. Then he reached for his phone. I will need to make some calls, he said. The process you are describing is not straightforward. There are protocols, authorizations. Your name is on the account, yes, but your husband's instructions have been the only ones this bank has ever received. Then perhaps it's time they received some from me. He dialed, spoke in rapid German, listened, spoke again. Vivian watched the city through the window. The river moved below, gray-green in the morning light, indifferent to the transactions happening in the buildings along its banks. She thought about Graham somewhere over the Atlantic, believing he was racing toward safety, believing he was one step ahead. He wasn't. Brenner ended his call, set down the phone. The account has been flagged, he said. No transactions will be processed without dual authorization until the matter is resolved. Your husband will discover this when he arrives at the bank. How long before it's resolved? That depends on the courts and on whether your husband chooses to contest. He'll contest. Then it could take months, perhaps longer. Brenner steepled his fingers. You should know, Mrs. Hartwell, that your husband has significant resources and significant motivation. A man who has spent 8 years building a financial escape route does not abandon it easily. I'm not asking him to abandon it. Vivian stood, gathered the ledger. I'm asking him to share it. The call came 3 hours later, while Vivian was waiting in the lobby of a hotel near the Paradeplatz. She had not checked in, had not eaten, had simply sat in an armchair near the entrance, watching the door, waiting for whatever came next. The number on her phone was Graham's. She answered, You froze the account. His voice was ragged, stripped of the polish she was used to. You actually froze the goddamn account. Yes. Do you have any idea what you've done? There are obligations tied to that money, commitments, people who are expecting. I'm sure there are. Vivian's voice was calm. I'm sure there are many things connected to that account that you've never told me about. Investments I haven't seen, debts I don't know, perhaps even a few more mistresses with their hands out. Silence on the other end. Where are you? Graham asked finally. Where do you think? Another silence. She could hear him breathing. Heavy, controlled. The sound of a man trying to master his temper. This isn't how this works, Vivian. You can't take unilateral action on marital assets. There are procedures, agreements. We're supposed to negotiate. We were supposed to be faithful too. We were supposed to be honest. We were supposed to be partners. Vivian let the words land. But you stopped following those rules a long time ago, so I don't see why I should keep following mine. If you think this is going to give you leverage, it's already given me leverage. The account is frozen. The documents have been copied to 3 separate law firms in 3 separate jurisdictions. The photograph of the bank statement is sitting in my attorney's office in New York, waiting to be filed with the court the moment you try to contest. Vivian paused. You can fight me, Graham. But you can't outrun what I already have. The line went quiet again. This time, when he spoke, his voice had changed, smaller, uncertain. What do you want? I told you what I want. I want you to sign. The divorce? All of it. The divorce, the settlement, the division of assets, the real assets, not the ones you've been hiding. I want a clean break, Graham, and I want it now. And if I refuse, then I file everything, the affair, the hidden accounts, the fraud, and whatever Nina Blackwell has been threatening to tell the press, I tell it first. Vivian stood, walked toward the window. You know me, Graham. You know I don't bluff. The silence stretched. She could hear him thinking, could almost feel the calculations spinning behind his eyes, the costs, the risks, the paths forward and back. Graham had built his life on mathematics, on odds, on the precise measurement of risk against reward. She was giving him an equation with only one solution. I need time. You have until I land in New York. That's approximately 9 hours. Vivian checked her watch. I suggest you use them wisely. She ended the call. The flight home felt longer than the journey out. Vivian sat in the first-class cabin with the window shade drawn, the ledger open on her lap, the events of the past 36 hours playing through her mind in fragments. The towel, the shower, the water glass on the wrong side of the bed. Such small things, such trivial betrayals, and yet they had set everything in motion. Not because they were new, but because they had finally become visible. The affair had been ongoing for over a year. The hidden account stretched back nearly a decade. The lies had been compounding in the background of her life like interest on a debt she hadn't known she was carrying. She wondered what else she didn't know. The thought should have been frightening. Instead, it felt almost liberating. She had spent 12 years trusting a man who had never deserved that trust. She had built a life on a foundation of deceit. And now, for the first time, she was seeing the structure clearly, seeing the cracks, the faults, the places where the whole edifice had been ready to collapse. It had taken a stranger's photographs to show her what was already there. She closed the ledger, leaned her head against the seat, closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the plane was beginning its descent. Patricia was waiting at the house when Vivian arrived. So was a courier, holding an envelope that bore the letterhead of Graham's law firm. This came 2 hours ago, Patricia said. I was instructed to give it to you personally. Vivian took the envelope, opened it. Inside, the divorce petition she had presented to Graham 2 days ago. Every page signed, every clause initialed, every term she had demanded, accepted. And at the bottom, in Graham's handwriting, you were right. About all of it. She stood in the foyer with the papers in her hand waiting to feel something. Triumph, relief, vindication. Instead, there was only a kind of quiet. The hush that follows a storm. Patricia cleared her throat. Will there be anything else, ma'am? Has Mr. Hartwell been in contact? No, ma'am. His assistant called to say he'll be remaining in Europe for the foreseeable future. His personal effects are to be shipped to an address in London. London, of course. Far enough to avoid the fallout, close enough to monitor from a distance. Graham had always preferred to observe his messes rather than clean them. Prepare the guest wing, Vivian said. I'll be sleeping there tonight. The guest wing, ma'am? The master bedroom is no longer mine. Vivian folded the papers, slipped them back into the envelope. It hasn't been for a long time. I just didn't know it. She climbed the stairs, walked past the room where it had all unraveled, past the chair where the towel had hung, past the bed with its tangled sheets, past the nightstand with the water glass that was gone now, removed by staff who knew better than to leave evidence lying around. The guest wing was smaller, simpler. A bed, a desk, a view of the garden that Graham had never cared about. She set her briefcase down, pulled back the covers. For the first time in 3 days, she slept. The weeks that followed moved with a strange momentum. Lawyers sent documents. Vivian signed them. Accounts were divided, titles transferred, the machinery of separation grinding forward with the efficiency of a process designed for exactly this purpose. She heard nothing from Graham directly. He communicated through intermediaries, through legal briefs, through the careful choreography of attorneys who had done this dance 1,000 times before. Nina Blackwell vanished. The apartment in the Greystone was sold. To whom, Vivian didn't know and didn't care. The charity where they had both served on the board quietly removed Graham's name from its letterhead. The society pages stopped mentioning him. He had become, in the language of the world he'd inhabited, a non-person. Vivian did not miss him. She missed the idea of him sometimes, the partner she had believed she'd married, the future she had imagined they would share, but the actual man, the one who had lied and hidden and built his life on foundations of deceit, that man she released without regret. The anonymous caller never contacted her again. The photographs, the ledger, the letter with its careful handwriting, all of it remained in the safe in Vivian's study, evidence of a story she no longer needed to tell. Whoever had orchestrated the revelation had wanted nothing in return. That alone was remarkable enough to stay with her. On the day the divorce was finalized, Vivian walked through the house she had shared with Graham for 12 years. The paintings were still on the walls. The books were still in their cases. The furniture, the rugs, the carefully chosen objects that had once represented a life built together. All of it remained, waiting for her to decide what to do with it. She stopped in the master bedroom. The bed had been stripped, remade with linens she hadn't chosen. The nightstands were bare. No water glasses, no books, no evidence of anyone's presence. The room smelled like cleaning products and absence. She crossed to the chair by the window, the teak chair where the spare towel had hung, where she had reached without knowing why and found the first proof of what her husband had become. The chair was empty now. She pulled it closer to the window, sat in it, looked out at the garden, at the trees beginning to turn, at the life she was about to begin. Behind her, the room stayed exactly as it was. 6 months later, Vivian stood at the window of a different house, smaller, quieter, hers alone. The papers had been filed, the settlement paid, the last threads of her marriage cut. She had kept some things and sold others, had walked away from the estate and everything it represented. The new place was a brownstone in the city, purchased with money that was hers by right and by law. 3 floors, a garden in the back. Rooms she was still learning to fill. She had hired no staff. Did her own cooking, her own cleaning, her own small rituals of daily life. It was strange at first, after years of servants and schedules and the constant presence of other people's labor, but strange was not the same as unwelcome. The doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. The thought crossed her mind that it might be Graham, finally returning, finally ready to say whatever he hadn't been able to say from across an ocean. But when she opened the door, the woman standing on the steps was not anyone she recognized. Tall, silver-haired, dressed in a gray coat that spoke of money without announcing it. Mrs. Hartwell. The voice was familiar, the voice from the phone. I thought it was time we met in person. Vivian studied the woman's face. Fine bones, eyes that held something guarded and old. You sent the photographs. I did. And the ledger, the bank statements, all of it. Why? The woman smiled, a small, careful expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. May I come in? Vivian hesitated. Then she stepped aside. They sat in the living room. The autumn light falling through windows that Vivian had not yet bothered to dress with curtains. The woman, who had still not offered her name, held a cup of tea Vivian had prepared without asking whether she wanted it. I was married to Graham, the woman said, a long time ago. Before you. The words landed in the space between them. He never mentioned a previous wife. He wouldn't have. The marriage was annulled. His family made certain of that. The woman's voice was steady, matter of fact. I was young. I didn't come from money. I made the mistake of believing that love was enough. What happened? What always happens. He took what he wanted, and when I became inconvenient, he disposed of me. A pause, but I kept records. Even then, I knew there might come a day when those records would be useful. Vivian set down her own cup. You've been waiting for this. For years. I've been watching for this. There's a difference. The woman's eyes met hers. I didn't know it would be you. But when I saw how he was building another hidden life, the accounts, the properties, the woman, I knew it was only a matter of time before he did to someone else what he did to me. I wanted to make certain that someone would have the tools to fight back. You could have exposed him yourself. I could have, but exposure without consequence is just gossip. I needed someone with standing, someone who could use the evidence in a court of law. The woman's smile returned, smaller this time. You had access I never did. You had lawyers, resources, the legal standing to demand discovery. All I could offer was information. You're the one who made it matter. Vivian absorbed this. The logic was clear, even if the emotions behind it remained opaque. This woman, Graham's first wife, his first victim, had spent years preparing a weapon she could never wield herself, had delivered it into Vivian's hands at exactly the moment when it would do the most damage. What do you want from me now? Nothing. The woman stood, set her teacup on the table. I wanted to see for myself that it worked, that you survived, that he didn't get away with it this time. He's in London. I know. I know a great deal about where Graham is and what he's doing. The woman moved toward the door. But he's not my concern anymore. And he shouldn't be yours. She stopped at the threshold, turned back. You asked me once who your enemy was. Do you remember? You said I knew the answer. And do you? Now? Vivian considered the question. She thought of the towel, the shower, the water glass on the wrong nightstand. She thought of the photographs and the ledger and the years of lies she had walked through without seeing. My enemy was my own willingness to not look, she said finally. My enemy was my trust. The woman nodded. Then you've learned what I couldn't teach you. She opened the door, stepped out into the autumn light. Be well, Mrs. Hartwell. Wait. Vivian followed her to the threshold. You never told me your name." The woman paused on the steps. The light caught her face, illuminating lines that spoke of years and weather and a grief that had never quite healed. "I'm not sure it matters anymore," she said. "I've been so many things to so many people. Graham's mistake, his first failure, the woman who wouldn't stay, buried." A pause. "But if you need something to call me, my name was Caroline. Once. Before he took that too." She walked down the steps, disappeared around the corner, did not look back. Vivian stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the empty street. Then she closed the door, returned to the window where she had been standing when the bell rang. The garden outside was quiet. The leaves were turning. The life she was building, small, uncertain, entirely her own, was waiting for her to continue building it. She turned away from the window. The room stayed exactly as it was. A year passed. Vivian sold the brownstone, moved to a smaller apartment, then to a house upstate, then back to the city when the quiet became too heavy. She tried different versions of a life without Graham, working, not working, traveling, staying still, and found that none of them felt quite right. But none of them felt wrong either. The divorce settlement had left her comfortable, not wealthy in the way she had been wealthy before, but secure. She took consulting work when it interested her, sat on boards that aligned with her values, built relationships with people who knew her as Vivian, not as Mrs. Hartwell. She heard from Graham twice, once through lawyers asking for the return of some antique his father had left him, once through a mutual acquaintance relaying a message she chose not to receive. She did not respond to either. Nina Blackwell remarried. The news appeared in a society column that Vivian no longer read, but that a friend forwarded with a raised eyebrow emoji. The groom was a tech executive with a reputation for volatility. Vivian wished her well and meant it. Caroline never contacted her again. Sometimes, in the early mornings when Vivian sat alone with her coffee, she thought about the chain of events that had led her here, the towel she had picked up without thinking, the choice she had made, or the choice that had been made for her to see what was there instead of what she wanted to be there. The stranger who had handed her weapons and asked for nothing in return. She had spent 12 years in a marriage built on deception. She had survived. She had emerged. She had left the room exactly as it was. That was not nothing. The final piece of the puzzle arrived in autumn, 2 years after the divorce was finalized. Vivian was in her office, a small space she rented in a building near her apartment. A place to work that was not her home, when her assistant knocked on the door. "There's a package for you. No return address." The assistant left it on her desk. Vivian looked at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside, a single photograph. Vivian and Graham on their wedding day. Young, smiling, standing outside a church whose name she had forgotten. The photograph had been taken by someone in the crowd, not the official photographer. It showed them from behind, walking toward a car, her hand in his. On the back, in handwriting, she recognized, "Before everything. I thought you should have it. No signature." But she knew. Caroline had kept this, for years, had held on to proof that once, however briefly, there had been something real, and now she was giving it away. Vivian set the photograph on her desk, looked at the 2 figures in it, strangers really, people she no longer was and no longer wanted to be. She could see the tension in her own shoulders, even in the photo, could see the way Graham's head was already turning toward something outside the frame. She had thought at the time that he was looking at their future. Now she knew he had been looking for an exit. She picked up the photograph, crossed to the window, looked out at the city spread below her, gray and gold in the autumn light. Then she tore the photograph in half, dropped the pieces in the wastebasket, sat back down at her desk. The room stayed exactly as it was, and Vivian finally moved on. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Mr. Douglas Tales, where powerful stories unfold one moment at a time.